então, a sessão especial, os 150 anos de lançamento do livro I do Capital. Temos aqui na mesa o professor Michael Heinrich, da Universidade de Berlim. Ele foi um dos membros da equipe de trabalho da Mega 2, que foi uma revisão e a republicação das obras de Marx. Foi editor de uma revista de economia durante 30 anos lá na Alemanha, mas o nome que ele me falou em alemão aí eu não consigo reproduzir. Tá? E o último livro dele se chama Uma Introdução aos 3 volumes de do Capital de Marx. Tá? Tá em inglês, edição também em francês e espanhol. Junto com ele, o nosso amigo professor José Paulo Netto, professor emérito da UFRJ, estudioso da obra de Marx, com uma obra também produzida em torno de toda a teoria e todo o pensamento de Marx. E do meu lado esquerdo aqui, o professor Luiz Gonzaga de Melo Belluzzo, professor aqui da UNICAMP, conhecido de todos, né? Cada um vai ter 40 minutos para expor, depois nós abrimos aí a participação para o público. Tá? A ordem de apresentação é essa que está no programa, então vamos começar com o professor Michael Heinrich.
So, first I have to excuse I will speak in English. I'm not very talented with foreign languages, and so besides German, unfortunately English is my only language I can talk in. Let me say first, thank you very much for the invitation to this conference. I really feel honored to be here and have the possibility to talk to you. We have the 150th anniversary of Capital. At least in the German discussion about economists, I know that Capital is mainly an unknown book. We have it in German, we have it in many editions, but among the economists, Capital is not very much read. I learned that in Brazil the situation is rather different, but nevertheless I want to start my presentation with a brief overview. What is Capital not? Because according to my experiences, it is very often confused what is capital about and what is capital not. After this brief introduction, I will talk about the monetary character of value and capital, and at the end I will come to the incompleteness of capital and the difficulties we have when we want to use it. But now, first, what is capital not? It is not an analysis of the British capitalism of 19th century or of a stage of competitive capitalism. Marx already in the preface of 1867 stresses that he took his examples from England, but these are only examples to illustrate his theoretical development. At the end of volume 3, Marx stresses that in this work, in Capital, he wanted to present the capitalist mode of production in its, and now a literal quote, in its ideal average. This, I think, is very important to understand the object of capital. It is not just an empirical average taking three advanced capitalist countries looking what do they have in common. No, Marx wanted to present the ideal average, meaning he wants to present what necessarily belongs to the capitalist mode of production, even when it was not fully developed during his lifetimes, like, for example, the production of relative surplus value, something which was fully developed in 20th century, but Marx already stressed this in 19th century. The second point, what capital is not, or what does it not include? Capital doesn't include a theory of absolute immiseration. Such a theory of absolute immiseration we can find in the Communist Manifesto from 1848. But in Capital, we do not find such a theory. In Capital, we can find an explanation why we have a widening gap between income and the fortune of the working class on the one hand, and the capitalist class on the other hand. The working class receives what is necessary for its reproduction. The capitalist class advances capital, and maybe the single capitalist will go bankruptcy, but the class will receive the advanced capital plus a profit. So, in fact, we can find in Marx the content of a sentence 100 years after Marx, written by Joan Robinson, the famous Keynesian scholar. She wrote, I think in the year 57, workers spend what they get, and capitalists get what they spend. Or maybe even Kalecki. I read it from Joan Robinson, but this sentence, the content is already included in Marx. It is not a new insight of 20th century. The third point, what is capital not about? And this is a much more disputed point. I would say in Capital, in Marx Capital, there is no theory of a collapse, of a capitalist collapse, that crises become worse and worse, and at the end there is a collapse. We can find such a theory of collapse in the Grundrisse, written 10 years before the first volume of Capital appeared. In Grundrisse, Marx indeed, in this famous fragment on machinery, that by the progress of productivity, less and less direct labor is needed to produce, and this reduction of the need of direct labor will force a kind of collapse of a mode of production which rests on the measure of value by labor. In Capital, in the first volume of Capital, Marx makes fun of such ideas. He quoted there Quesnay, who used this argument to criticize early representatives of the labor value, of the labor theory of value. And Marx states in the first volume of Capital that it is not important how much labor is used to produce a single commodity. For capital, it is important how much surplus value is included. So the whole argument of Grundrisse, in my view, is criticized, is overcome in Capital. And therefore, there is not at all a theory of capitalist collapse in the major work of Marx. Nevertheless, I know there are a lot of Marxist scholars who try to give reason to such a theory of collapse. But in my view, they confuse the arguments we can find in Grundrisse and the arguments we can find in Capital. So now I come to the fourth and last points of this brief introduction, what is capital and what it is not. Labor theory of value. By the way, Marx never used the term labor theory of value. He only used the term value theory. But let's continue using the term labor theory of value. This theory is not an explanation of the exchange relation of commodities in everyday life. Already in volume 1 in chapter 4, in a long footnote, Marx states that the average prices in the market are not circulating, are not oscillating around labor values. Labor values as developed in volume 1 are just the first step for a rather complicated scientific explanation of the dynamics of capital. But to look, when I say this laptop has 10 times the value of this table, from this you cannot, not 10 times the value, it has 10 times the price of this table, you cannot conclude that you then need 10 times the labor to produce this laptop compared with this table. Such an accounting would be nonsense, and also this is not an argument against labor theory of value, because it is not the aim to prove such things. This was brief introduction. Now I will characterize what I see some very important features, very important attributes of the theories Marx presented in Capital. And I will again start with the labor theory of value. Another misunderstanding, especially by neoclassical economists, is that Marx and the classical school, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, that they have the same labor theory of value, that this is one big basket of theory which is then confronted with the marginalist theory, with marginal utility. But Marx's labor theory of value is not at all the same as the classics. It is a critique of the classical theory. And also this we have to recognize when we read Capital. The subtitle of Capital is Critique of Political Economy. It is not a new political economy or an alternative political economy. The subtitle states Critique of Political Economy. And this means, in this generality, it means that Marx wanted to criticize a whole science. He wanted not only to criticize single authors or single theories. This is the everyday job of every scientist. When you, the younger of you, prepare your PhD, of course you will criticize someone, and this will give reason that you have to say something new. So this is the everyday job. But what Marx intended to do was to criticize a whole science, to criticize the basic assumptions of this science, to criticize the basic categories of the science, and one of these basic categories was value. Marx, in a famous remark you can find already in chapter 1 of volume 1 of Capital, in the section on fetishism, in this remark, Marx stated that the classics more or less correctly recognized labor as the content of value. But the classics, he continues, never put the question why this content, labor, takes the form of value. They just take this as granted, as natural. And why the classical authors took this as granted? Because they believed in commodity production as a kind of natural system of production for humanity. Adam Smith, in his famous Wealth of Nations, states in the preface that he wants to find the natural laws of production. And production for him always was commodity production. The highest level of commodity production was capitalist production. And so for Adam Smith, the natural laws of production were the laws of capitalist production. So the basic accusation Marx was doing against the classics was that they confuse a special historical mode of production, a special social form of production, they confuse with production as such. Humans always need labor to produce means of subsistence. They always need labor products. But they don't always need labor products in the form of commodities. Humans always need tools, machines, raw materials for production. But they don't need these tools, these machines, in the form of capital as value designed to increase the production of value. So this was the most basic critique Marx did against the science of political economy. Regarding labor theory of value, his critics was also more detailed, more precise. When you read carefully the first chapter of volume 1, you will find 3 striking features which distinguish Marx's labor theory of value from that of the classics. There is this distinction between abstract and concrete labor, which I think is very well known. I don't want to go here in depth. Secondly, the theory of the value form, and fourth, the theory of fetishism. Here I want to focus on value form because this marks a very fundamental and striking difference to the classical theory. The classics, Smith and Ricardo, restricted to reduce value to labor. Money they saw such only as a kind of additional feature. In his analysis of value form, Marx stresses that value is a social construct, that value is not something natural, it is not something you can touch, you can handle easily, and therefore this social entity, value, needs an independent, autonomous form of experience. It needs something which can be touched, which can be handled, and this is the general equivalent, and when this general equivalent becomes permanent, we call it money. Insofar, for Marx, money was not just a practical tool making the life of commodity producers more easy, like Smith and Ricardo treated money. No. Value itself, in the view of Marx, cannot exist without the relation to money. Insofar, we can call Marx's value theory a monetary theory of value, because he has this strong relation between value and money. And when we read the second volume of Theories of Surplus Value, where Marx was dealing very extensively with David Ricardo, he estimated Ricardo very much as the most advanced bourgeois economist. There he criticized very clearly that Ricardo doesn't see the necessary relation between value and money. Ricardo sees the relation between value and labor, but that this labor, what is abstract labor, general labor, has to express itself in a general equivalent, necessarily Ricardo didn't see, and this is stressed very much by Marx in this second volume of Theories of Surplus Value. So Marx himself never used this term monetary theory of value. It is a term of 20th century. But what is expressed with this term, I think we can find very clearly also in Marx's writings himself. This strong connection between money and value has consequences. When money is so strictly connected to value, it is clear there cannot be any neutrality of money. There cannot be an idea proposed by neoclassical economists that there is a kind of dichotomy between the so-called real sphere and the monetary sphere. No, there is in Marx's view, and also later in Keynes' view, not at all such a dichotomy. Money is not a veil in front of the real forces of economy, not at all. Therefore, already when Marx was discussing money and value, we also can find a very basic criticism of Say's law, that there is an automatic equilibrium between demand and supply. Also something what 70 years later, Keynes in his general theory stated very strictly. You can find it already in the same strict sense in Marx Capital Volume 1. But not only this. In Marx, we have not only a monetary theory of value. This monetary theory of value continues, transforms into a monetary theory of capital, already in Volume 1. How Marx is analyzing capital. By the way, for analyzing capital, the capitalist plays a minor role. He analyzes capital as a movement of value. You all know probably this famous formula, money, commodity, more money, the general formula of capital. Marx analyzes this in the first subchapter of chapter 4 of volume 1, this general formula, as a movement of value in order to increase the amount of value. And there he states that value as capital takes sometimes the form of money, sometimes the form of commodity. But these two forms are not just equal. It is not arbitrarily which form value takes. Value as the overall subject, das übergreifende Subjekt in German, needs money as a necessary form of experience. So this overall character of value in the circulation of capital needs money as its necessary expression. Insofar, again, you have a monetary theory of value of capital, which also has some similarities to Keynes' idea that for capitalist production, first you have to have a disposition over money, and not like the neoclassical school states, a disposition about factors of production. No, money comes first, and this also we have in Marx. By the way,